Be it further resolved that U.S. Conference of Mayors calls upon the Congress and the states to adopt legislation which would require large corporations employing a significant number of workers to give communities adequate notice when it involves the moving of any production overseas. In other words, eliminate everything after, not everything, but after notice, insert the word when, strike of any planned closing or the, and substitute the phrase when it involves the moving of any production overseas.
Language, thank you. The original language would appear to have embraced domestic closings of any kind.
Yes.
I think Mayor Martinez's amendment would simply make it clear it's international, and Mayor Alexander said that was intention. I'm now very happy. Thank you.
Just have one question. I can understand how Mayor Savannah can have a tan because I'm there a lot in the sun, but how can the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota have a tan?
He just bent down to tie his shoelaces a little while ago, and the color rushes to his head.
Mayor Feinstein?
Yeah, as a city that has a great deal of international business and foreign investment in it, I am adamantly opposed to plant closure legislation, and there are very practical reasons for it. I happen to believe in the free market, and that the free market and the competitive edge is what makes this nation and our cities great. And the minute you restrict an ability of somebody to close with notice requirements, their credit is subject to getting cut off, they have all kinds of problems, and they're not going to come near your city or your locality if they know that that's your belief. Foreign investment coming into cities, like it or not, has many, many choices in this nation with all kinds of incentives. I just might say to even get into this, as vague as it is, with wording like adequate notice. What is adequate notice? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? What happens to a company during that period of time? What happens to its credit when it posts that? I think it's extraordinarily dangerous, and I, for one, can't support this resolution if that kind of language is in it.
May the chair respond? May I have the privilege of responding, Mr. Chairman? We did not spell out adequate notice to be 60 days, 90 days, because we think that's the province of the Congress. What we're really asking is that the Congress and the states adopt legislation, and in the legislative process, the very points that you're making will be debated. And when the result comes out, it will be the result of arguments such as you have raised, and proponents and opponents. But what we're headed for here is an idea. It's an idea that large corporations that move overseas simply give our communities notice so that the dislocation is not so horrible. We've each experienced that in our cities, and as I say, it's not punitive. The committee adopted it unanimously because it recognizes that there can be a great deal of pain and suffering for the families that are hurt by such plant closings through the relocation. There's no way to alleviate that pain and suffering unless we have some notice, so that we can apply for job training funds, so that we can look for other industry to pick up the slack. That's all we're asking for. We're not saying what's adequate or what isn't. You're quite right. But that's why we left it that way, so that the legislators could debate that point.
Mayor Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to speak in support of the resolution with reference to the adequate notice section, for the simple reason that it does give communities the opportunity to help in the relocation and retraining of workers living in their communities who help pick up the tax load. And I see no reasons for not supporting this. I think it's a reasonable request, and I respectfully request that all of our colleagues consider it in a positive fashion.
All right.
Question on the amendment? The Martinez amendment?
Excuse me?
Call the question on the Martinez?
We had some hands up before the question here.
I'm troubled by the word adequate notice. I share the mayor of San Francisco's concern about this. I mean, it's great sentiment. It's certainly helpful. My community's been impacted by plant closings and moving things overseas. The semiconductor industry has done that. The computer industry.
Could you use the mic, please?
No. Is it not on?
Pull it over.
Yeah, it's on.
But when I hear the rationale for this, and it comes around, all we want is adequate notice in order to make the adjustments, train people. Well, you're not talking about a notice in the way of weeks. You're talking about notice in the way of years. If that's what you want, if that's your definition of adequate notice, to make the adjustments, to try to buy the plant, to try to retrain people, that, again, that's not weeks, that's at least months and probably years, and that's not a very practical request, quite frankly. You know, the way business has to operate to be competitive. The credit concerns, their ability to borrow to keep a company afloat is just one of them.
Passes. We now go to the next, continue your report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, we'll take these one by one if you want. Resolution number 20, educational vouchers, which opposes the enactment of federal legislation that would authorize a national program to pay the cost of enrolling children at private schools and pay the cost of enrolling children at public schools inside or outside their school districts. I move its passage.
Moved and seconded for resolution 20. Seconded, any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, there was one slight clerical error. Would staff like to point that out?
Yes, we are a little sorry about that technicality. In the first whereas, the second whereas, we eliminated one before intergovernmental. We eliminated the just before one intergovernmental.
Anything else? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
I had two concerns. First of all, in the second whereas clause, the one just referenced, I'm not sure I understand the use of the term intergovernmental. I don't really think of the federal government as being intergovernmental, but rather a government separate and distinct from the state and local governments. So was there some reason why that term intergovernmental was used?
We can take in or out if you would like. Federal government is the one governmental entity which can redistribute resources for the benefit of all children.
Consider it a friend.
Yeah, just a use of the term intergovernmental that I've not seen before is characterizing it.
We'll accept that as an
Please.
amendment.
Okay.
Second,
Anything else, Mayor?
second concern that I had was in the last whereas clause. It really comes down heavy in precluding any use of vouchers. And that troubles me because there are instances in the, particularly with respect to handicapped children whose education is funded with federal monies, and yet the local school district doesn't have an adequate program for them, and yet an adjacent school district might. And where you've got a situation where the public school district and the parents of the child support use of the voucher to go to a neighboring school district which has a more comprehensive program, I think that's entirely appropriate. What I'd like to do, and what I do is offer a motion to amend that whereas clause, that resolve clause, so it would strike, starting in the third line, everything after which would strike everything after that and replace it with a simple statement: force or require local public school systems to participate in a voucher system. The effect of that, if adopted, would be to amend the resolve clause so that it reads, now therefore be it resolved that the U.S. Conference of Mayors opposes the enactment of federal legislation which would force or require local public school systems to participate in a voucher system. I think that achieves really the concern, the legitimate concern of this resolution, and yet at the same time does not preclude acting in the best interest of the child, which is really what our concern ought to be.
All right, the motion is to amend after which would drop everything and add force or require local public school systems to participate in a voucher system. Have a second to that? Excuse me?
That wasn't a second.
All right, it is seconded. Discussion on this amendment. Mayor?
We would like to point out that this is legislation that does not disallow the opportunities for handicapped children. It's a voluntary opportunity in the legislation.
Yes, Mayor.
Chairman, let me also point out that this resolution would not prohibit one school district from contracting with another public school district for special services that that school district does not have at its disposal. So, Mayor Mercer, I believe that we're trying to get at the erosion of public education where you take federal dollars or special educational vouchers that the federal government would pay for special situations and give them to private schools. A lot of us think this is the erosion of public education. We want to get at the inter-district transfers between public school districts. I don't see anything in this resolution that would not allow it to happen. And also, I don't think the question is one of force, it's one of national policy, whereby the federal government should not be contributing to the demise, in our view, of public education. So in terms of handicapped children and other special educational needs, I don't think this resolution prevents that from happening on a tailor-made basis for school districts to decide. There are situations where there are nonprofit organizations that specialize in the education of handicapped children. And we, in fact, do contract with those organizations. The idea here, though, is not to open the floodgate where a parent or a school district can decide that we'd rather take money and give it to private schools. I believe in private schools as an option for parents, but I don't think the public sector ought to support private schools. That ought to be a choice that parents and those who buy services make. It's the same thing is true of tuition tax credits. I don't think we ought to allow the public funds to be used to subsidize or help private schools from the public sector. I believe that there ought to be something private schools ought to do themselves, and the public schools ought to be free, and school boards ought to be free to spend this money in the public sector, and it's public taxpayers' money.
Mr. Chair.
Mayor Byrd.
In our state, South Carolina, the federal government puts very little money into schools. And I just kind of question the thrust of this. I can't imagine a voucher system working if most states are like ours, because the federal government puts such a small amount of money into the school system. So I don't know where the concern comes from. If there were state governments who were doing it, that might be of some concern. But I just don't. In our case, the federal government does not put enough money in to move anybody.
Chairman.
All right, Mayor Mercer, and then Mayor Burkett.
Well, I appreciate Mayor Berry's explanation, but it doesn't change what I'm doing. I'm not really simply concerned about being able to put a handicapped child whose education is being subsidized by the federal government into a public school. I am interested in putting that handicapped child wherever it is the best interest of that child to go to school. Now, if the public school district thinks that the best thing for that child is to go to a private school, then and the parents share that point of view, then as far as I'm concerned, that's the extent of the federal inquiry. It ought to be to support the education of that child. I don't think we ought to be using vouchers that support education of handicapped children to subsidize one particular kind of school district or another. That is irrelevant. And the thrust of this motion is simply to lock out of that child's life the opportunity to go to the best school for the money, regardless of whether it's public or private. And if you're concerned about the child, you support my motion. If you're concerned about keeping federal monies going to public school districts and making sure it doesn't do anything else, then you oppose it. It's that simple.
I'm taking over briefly for Mayor Rousakis. Mayor Cook,
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify for the members of our committee that the resolution will not preclude the local district making whatever decision they want to make with reference to an individual student. What we're more concerned about is the fact that we do not have a steady erosion of support for public schools, which is the lifeblood of our nation. There is pending legislation in Congress right now that would, through the amount of federal aid that they do provide for local school districts, would require a use of the voucher system to further erode the support of the public school system. And this committee was unanimous in its belief that we should support our public school system, period.
Thank you very much. Mayor Bergen?
You're talking a national policy when in reality the educational systems are local and state responsibility. Mayor Mercer's comment is the child, the individual that we're all concerned with. And it's a local decision that has to be made. And I think this resolution presumes a national policy and a national oversight of education. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think the resolution really goes too far.
Any further discussion? The pending question is Mayor Mercer's amendment.
Or just, Mr. Chairman, the thrust of the legislation is to object to any efforts on the federal level to try and force the local districts to make those kinds of decisions.
Okay. Those in favor of Mayor Mercer's amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
The noes have it. The motion fails. Pending question now is the adoption of the resolution number 20. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Those in favor of resolution 20 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it.